sponsored by HUD's Office of Community Planning and Development, or CPD. My name is John McGaugh, and I work at the National Center on Family Homelessness. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of CPD, I would like to thank all of you for joining us. Today's webinar is Using the eCon Planning Suite to Engage Public Participation and Consultation in the Consolidated Planning Process. Now, before we begin, I would like to make some logistical announcements. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour, and the webinar is being recorded. The recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted next week on the Consolidated Plan website on the Technical Assistance and Training page. As an attendee of this webinar, your microphone will automatically be muted. Please listen to the presentation through your phone for best results. The call-in information has been sent to you, and it is also listed in the upper left-hand corner of your meeting room screen under Audio Instructions. Another option is to use your computer speakers, and this means that you will need to turn on and turn up the speakers on your computer. Due to the large number of attendees, there may be a slight delay in the advancement of the slides. If you experience any other technical difficulties, please let us know by using the Q&A box on your screen. You may also submit content-related questions using the same box, and we will try to address them during the presentation. Immediately following the webinar, you will be directed to a post-webinar survey. Participants are strongly encouraged to respond to the evaluation to inform the delivery of future webinars, and we greatly appreciate your input. Today's webinar will feature the following presenters: Caitlin Ott, Assistant Project Manager, and Meg Barclay, Project Manager, both of whom work at the CPD office. And now I'd like to pass this over to Caitlin to begin the presentation.
Thanks, John, and welcome everyone for today's webinar, Using the eCon Planning Suite to Engage Citizen Participation and Consultation. We know that some grantees have struggled in the past to generate interest in the consolidated planning process, holding hearings with very little attendance and receiving few comments during public comment periods. So our purpose today is to demonstrate how you can use the eCon Planning Suite tools to increase participation and to engage in meaningful outreach and consultation. First, I'll go over the agenda. Today's webinar will cover a brief overview of the eCon Planning Suite and its component pieces, the citizen participation and consultation regulatory requirements, some suggestions for how grantees can use the tools in the eCon Planning Suite to enhance their outreach efforts. I'll go over 2 case studies that demonstrate the use of the eCon Planning Suite for citizen participation and the consultation processes. And then we'll wrap up with what you can expect to see in the Citizen Participation and Consultation Toolkit when it is released later in August, as well as a summary of some key resources on the Consolidated Plan website. Before we get started, some instructions on asking questions. Please send your questions throughout the presentation. We may be able to answer some of the questions during the presentation if there is a pause, but the majority of the questions will be handled at the end of the presentation. Questions will be compiled and answered aloud for everyone's benefit. Only technical questions will actually be answered using the question box. Technical questions about, if you can't hear or whatnot will help you figure out how to get your sound working or any other issues that you might have. And so now we're going to have a poll question, and you should see it appear at the bottom of your screen. It asks you whether or not you attended the orientation webinar for CPD Maps on May 23rd, so go ahead and answer that. So it looks like as the results go up, we're maybe 50-50. A few more of you have attended, and that's great because we're going to go over how CPD Maps can be helpful today for your citizen participation and consultation processes. So if you know how to use the tool, it'll be beneficial. However, if you haven't seen one of the webinars or taken a look at the desk guide, you'll still be able to understand how the tool can be helpful, and you may just want to go after the webinar and either view the Orientation to CPD Maps webinar on May 23rd, which is posted on the OneCPD website and can be accessed from the Training and TA page of the Consolidated Plan website, or to also take a look at the desk guide for using CPD Maps, which is available on the Consolidated Plan website. And links to both of those resources will be available on the last slide of this presentation, so we'll get to it later. So this next slide will look familiar to many of you who did view any of the previous webinars. And the eCon Planning Suite is comprised of 3 components: expanded planning data, CPD Maps, and an electronic submission template for IDIS. But the difference here is that we show you how each component provides resources to support citizen participation and the consultation process. The housing and community development data is publicly available for use by citizens and stakeholders. CPD Maps allows the opportunity to create maps and reports that illustrate community needs for public comment, as well as for engaged citizens to produce and submit maps as a form of comment. And the template in IDIS addresses the requirements of citizen participation and consultation. The questions in the template can be used by grantees in a conversation for soliciting feedback, and the standard format of the template will be easy for the public to consume when the plan is published for comment. And this next slide displays how the steps of the planning and grants management cycle, how the citizen participation is at the center of that process in sort of a graphic that displays the various steps that grantees engage public and consultation partners to identify and determine their needs, to establish priorities, to build partnerships with stakeholders to align and leverage resources, to develop goals and strategies that make the most of limited funding, and to administer their grant programs, and then to evaluate and demonstrate progress and seek feedback on how their funds are being used so that they can determine whether strategies should continue or be changed. So next I'm going to go through requirements for the citizen participation and consultation in the Consolidated Plan, and these won't be any different than they have been in the past. We're just going to do a review. Are required by regulation and the public during the development of their Consolidated Plan. All grantees must prepare and follow a citizen participation plan. Grantees do have the flexibility to determine a participation process that works best to reach the required populations, including low and moderate income citizens who are likely to benefit from the CON Plan funding. There are, however, several requirements for the citizen participation plan with regard to outreach, including a description of how the outreach is conducted, how and when meetings are held, the defined period for comment before final draft approval, and a description of how public comment is included in the plan. You can refer to the regulations cited on this slide if you need more specific detail regarding the requirements. For consultation, grantees are required to engage stakeholders and solicit feedback. This process ensures that the interests of different partners with varied needs are represented in the grantee's strategy in the Consolidated Plan. The upcoming toolkit will include some more specific information around these required consultations and examples of the types of agencies that might help you to fulfill these requirements. It also provides ideas for using the eCon Planning Suite tools to address various challenges that you might face in both the consultation and citizen participation processes. While the citizen participation and consultation processes target 2 different audiences as indicated in the regulations, the overall intent of both is quite similar. 4 of the key objectives of these activities are to work with community members and organizations to identify strengths and needs, including past projects or areas of opportunity that grant programs might build on, as well as issues that may require more focus during the coming planning period. To increase the community's knowledge of your housing community development activities, as well as progress made through the use of CON Plan grant funds. Ideally, increasing knowledge of the grantee's goals, the analysis that led to those particular approaches, and any progress made towards those goals will help to build a consensus around Consolidated Plan strategies and gain public and partner support for the plan. Through this engagement, grantees can work to establish partnerships with neighborhood leaders, organizations, and other agencies, which will help when attempting to align resources to better serve target neighborhoods and populations. And now we'll talk about how the tools can be used to enhance these required efforts. The flowchart that I presented earlier in the presentation around citizen participation being at the center of the ongoing process would be followed through a standard sort of set of steps and a suggested approach to the steps for using the tools for citizen engagement and consultation would be to use the eCon Planning Suite tools to assess your needs and identify your priorities, to use CPD Maps to illustrate those needs so that it's easy for the public and other stakeholders to understand your analysis, to present the needs identified in your draft plan to the public and partner organizations, to explain how the needs were identified and how those needs led to the strategies that you're proposing, and then begin a dialogue to solicit meaningful feedback. Use the information gained through the process in conjunction with data analysis to develop final plan priorities and strategies, as well as responses to any comments or concerns, and then respond to public or stakeholder concerns and other inputs supported by data and the other information you've gathered through these two processes. Here we begin some examples for how the eCon Planning Suite can help grantees to move through these steps I just described. While going through a process to identify needs in your community, the data populated in the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS and the questions presented in the template are a good starting point for identifying your community's greatest needs. Viewing this data on the map can also help to determine which needs are most pressing and can be especially useful for locating which neighborhoods are affected by these issues. The reports function in CPD Maps can help grantees to dig a little further into the data to determine the specific populations that are affected in many cases. Note that CPD Maps also includes a number of change variables for mapping. This trend data can be useful in assessing how issues in your community are changing over time. Once you've identified your needs, grantees will present their priorities to partners and the public for review, comment, and feedback. CPD Maps provides an easy way to produce visual aids that illustrate the challenges and opportunities in a jurisdiction that led to the development of proposed strategies. These maps can be shared on a grantee website, via email or mailings, within reports or handouts passed out at a public meeting, or even enlarged to be posted around a public meeting or in a public space. When discussing maps during a presentation, it would be useful to explain the steps that were taken to create the maps that you display and how certain data that you're showing supports your proposed plan. And when it's released, the toolkit that will be available will explain how to identify specific data and create maps that may be useful for public comment. Ultimately, the goal of citizen participation and of consultation with stakeholders isn't to present just your ideas, but also to generate feedback as a result of sharing community needs and your proposed priorities that will contribute to a strong investment strategy. On this slide, we've outlined a sample of some of our suggested methods for jump-starting meaningful dialogue to solicit useful feedback. Starting a conversation around what a specific map is telling you may be a way to help your audience share their thoughts about where the need is in your community. This can be useful for community meeting or in your interaction with partner organizations who may also become funding partners. In addition, the template in IDIS provides discussion questions that can frame a conversation around relative priorities for spending limited resources within your jurisdiction. Identifying past investment locations on the map or ongoing activities of your partners may be useful in a discussion about leveraging and targeting investments in specific areas. Here on the slide, we've also listed a few methods for collecting feedback, including providing instruction to the public on how to use CPD Maps and collecting their comments online or through surveys once they've played with the mapping tool and created their own maps of need in their neighborhoods. The toolkit will have a sample handout with instructions for how to use CPD Maps that you might be able to print out and pass out or make available to the public online. It'll also contain additional ideas for methods of collecting feedback. And finally, once you have assessed your data, proposed your priorities to the public, accounted for public and stakeholder input or concerns, the template in IDIS will guide you through recording that process and your results. Completing the required fields in the template will help to ensure that you have fulfilled the Consolidated Plan regulatory requirements for citizen participation and consultation. And then, of course, you'll publish your plan and respond to final comments before you post an approved plan. We've developed several case studies for the toolkit that will demonstrate how a grantee might use proposed strategies for a specific outreach event. First, I'll go through the use of CPD Maps at a public meeting for citizen participation requirements. The first case study for using CPD Maps in the citizen participation process is with Washington, D.C. as our sample grantee. The scenario is that D.C. is seeking input on its proposed affordable housing strategies, so they prepare maps that display program accomplishments and other housing investments for citizen review at public meetings. They also post these maps on their website. Washington, D.C.'s objective in using the maps during the outreach process is to elevate community engagement and citizen participation during the needs assessment process in the preparation of their plan. In this case, D.C.'s outreach strategy is to hold a series of information gathering or needs assessment hearings at locations throughout the jurisdiction that have an internet connection and a room with a projector, so they can hold a live demonstration of CPD Maps and show the public the conditions in their community on the screen. In addition to more traditional outreach techniques, this grantee chose to go a step further than what is required by establishing a Consolidated Plan page on its website that includes a schedule of the needs assessment meetings, customized maps, instruction on using CPD Maps for citizens to gather information and create their own maps, a link to CPD Maps, and information on providing comments or feedback via the website. DC also included a quick response, or QR code, in all of its marketing materials, linking the user to the grantee's website where the prepared maps can be reviewed as an advanced technique of outreach. Next, we'll take a look at one of the maps that the grantee prepared around affordable housing needs and posted on its website. So here's the first map that DC created. It illustrates the change in median rent while also highlighting existing affordable housing investments in the area. This map was provided prior to the public meetings so citizens could come with comments, and it was also created during a live demonstration in order to kickstart discussion of what the data says about the needs in the jurisdiction. In reviewing this map, DC noted that there are very few housing investments in the northwest area of the city, and that rents seem to be going up in that area. So the grantee decided to turn on other map layers to illustrate the conditions in this area further for the audience. The city investigated the housing market in its community by modifying the map and turning on median contract rent, and then selecting the northwest area identified in the previous slide as a target area by using the reports widget. This map on the slide you're viewing shows that the target area also generally experiences higher rents than much of the rest of the city, along with having relatively fewer affordable housing investments. The grantee had selected the tracts in the target area through the reporting widget, as I mentioned, which are displayed outlined in light blue. The grantee then used CPD Maps to run a report on this area, showing a range of demographic, economic, and housing data for those selected tracts. This is the report that they generated for the selected target area, as shown on the previous slide, also with reference data for DC as a whole. The report shows that only about 18% of the units in this area of DC rent for less than $800 a month, as compared to about 44% of the units in the district as a whole. Based on this data, the jurisdiction may want to discuss with the community the need for affordable housing in the northwestern part of the city, and whether this should be a priority in the Consolidated Plan as compared to other needs within the jurisdiction. DC will likely also want to consult with partners to discuss whether there are barriers to development of affordable housing in this area of the city, such as higher costs or difficulty in acquiring sites, as well as strategies that might be implemented in the plan to overcome these barriers. In addition to conducting this live demonstration of CPD Maps during a public meeting, DC took narrative questions directly from the Consolidated Plan template to frame the discussion. The questions on NA10, the Needs Assessment screen, and MA50, the Needs and Market Analysis discussion screen, are especially helpful for this purpose. As you can see on this slide, many of the questions help the grantee to discuss the characteristics of the housing market and housing issues. Grantees may choose to pose these questions to the public in several different ways. You might present the data from CPD Maps, like we just showed, and then pose questions based on what citizens see on the maps, Or you might present the data from CPD Maps and then ask citizens what information is missing from the maps that would be important to consider when identifying needs and proposing priorities for the plan. For example, on the map we saw in the previous slide, are there any characteristics of the selected target areas or assets and opportunities in the selected target areas that are not displayed on the map? This type of discussion will provide on-the-ground knowledge to the critical examination of data, which is available through CPD Maps and the Comp Plan template in IDIS, making for a more well-rounded assessment of need in your community. And our second case study is using CPD Maps during the consultation process. This scenario uses the city of Cleveland, Ohio as a sample grantee. Cleveland is preparing its consolidated plan and is looking for feedback from organizations that may act as partners on particular activities or in specific target areas within the city. The city's goal is to leverage and align resources in target areas with other organizations or agencies that are investing in these neighborhoods. The city also hopes to get support for the proposed strategies in their plan. Prior to seeking feedback, this grantee reviewed prepared maps, ran CPD Maps reports, and held a series of discussions with programmatic staff. The city identified several potential target areas from these efforts that it wanted feedback on during its consultation process. By reviewing CPD Maps reports on this slide, the city noted that more than 80% of its labor force has less than a bachelor's degree. Furthermore, the vast majority of unemployed labor force comes from this population. The city then created a map to illustrate areas of high unemployment among this population and prepared to distribute the map to potential consultation partners. Here's the map that the city created. It shows the change in total jobs and the result of a map query that highlights census tracts with 25% unemployment for both high school graduates and those with some college experience, which is the population identified from the CPD Maps report on the previous slide. The map depicts both communities that have suffered from the largest job losses and communities with high unemployment among people with less than a bachelor's degree, the target population. Deciding that this map was useful in illustrating a specific need, the city distributed this map to partner agencies such as workforce development programs, community colleges, and other economic development agencies. Based on this map, the city was able to facilitate a discussion at its meetings to identify short-term and long-term funding and program implementation strategies that address the need for economic development, education, workforce training in certain communities. During the discussion, the city asked the consultation partners to identify neighborhoods already served by small business incubators and vocational programs, to provide feedback around the barriers existing for business incubators serving communities with high needs, to identify additional skills that unemployed workers may need to match available jobs in these areas, and to describe their own efforts to increase workforce development in this area of the city. Beyond the discussion, the city engaged its partners by asking them to plot and evaluate their investment in the neighborhoods with the highest need in order to identify ways to leverage existing efforts and resources for maximum impact. The results of these outreach strategies were that the city received feedback on a proposed priority and gained further on-the-ground knowledge about the areas where unemployment might need to be addressed. The city was able to identify whether there were any current approaches among its community partners that might be incorporated into the city's strategies in its consolidated plan. And the city built on existing relationships to establish partners for addressing its priority needs. By working with stakeholder organizations, the city helped to align investment, which will increase the impact of the Consolidated Plan grant programs. While consultation is required by the regulations and will be necessary to complete the consultation screens in the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS, it will also be extremely useful for completing the screens that you see listed on this slide because many of them do not contain pre-populated data. So your analysis will really rely on the information that you gather from your partner organizations through your consultation efforts. And with that, we'll wrap up with a quick summary of the upcoming toolkit and other resources that are available to you. And then we should have some time for your questions. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're currently finalizing a toolkit on using the eCon planning suite for citizen participation and consultation processes. The toolkit will be available on the ConPlan website and will provide even more information, ideas, and resources for grantees, including strategies to encourage participation in your meetings and to engage meaningful dialogue, how to create maps that will help you tell your story during public meetings, ways to educate the public and stakeholder organizations on using CPD Maps to support their input into your process, and more detailed case studies with examples of outreach methods. Again, you can look for this toolkit to be available later in August, this month, in 2012, on the Consolidated Plan website. And here on the last slide, you see a summary of our key resources available on the Consolidated Plan website, a direct link to the page that has information on CPD Maps, including the desk guide for using CPD Maps, information on future webinars and the archived webinar recordings. As I mentioned, we did a presentation on May 23rd on how to use CPD Maps, are available on the link on this slide. And then, of course, we have our 2 help desk email addresses, which you can contact if you have further questions after this webinar. And now we have some time to answer some of your questions that came in through the presentation. I have one question that says, what do you mean by community developed maps? And what we mean by this is we think that it might help engage the community members more if you encourage them to use CPD Maps on their own and even bring maps to the meeting to really discuss what, and support their input for whatever kind of activities they think are necessary in their community or whatever kind of need that they think is necessary in their community. And you can really kind of go back and forth and have a more meaningful dialogue. We had a question here about whether the eCon Planning Suite will offer an online listserv or posting site that grantees could use as a public access point. At this point, CPD doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, but the toolkit offers some good advice on how cities or how grantees can use their own websites to assist with citizen participation and consultation. So if your city or your state agencies already have a website, that hopefully the advice offered in the toolkit will help with that. We have a question about how the maps will work with a state program. And while we didn't include that in the webinar today, specific needs like the needs of states or even communities coming together to apply to create a consolidated plan strategy as a region, the specific challenges of each of those types of grantees or grantees coming together will be addressed in the toolkit. So you should really look for that in August, because we really dig more into specific barriers that you might experience, for example, especially in a large state, trying to do the outreach to citizens throughout the state. We have a question about whether or not the planning suite includes any transportation or commuter data. If you take a look at CPD Maps, we do have some transportation data right now. Not a lot of statistics on transportation. We do have the fixed rail transit lines that you can turn on the map. And then we have data about travel time to work and that sort of thing. So you can kind of see how your workforce, whether or not they're leaving your community. But not a lot of statistics as far as like ridership and that sort of thing. We're hoping to continue ongoing discussions with other federal agencies to bring in that sort of data, also to bring in data from other partner federal agencies with future enhancements of CPD Maps. We had a question about our email address for detailed questions about, the case study communities. That's a good thing to, the case study communities, these case studies were sort of made up for the purpose of illustrating how a city might use these things, since we were going to be we had to use maps of cities that were going to be recognizable. These cities themselves did not, these are not actual
case studies in the sense that we, spoke with these cities and they've let us know exactly how they're doing it. So just to be very clear about that, these were offered up as examples about how the data looks in these communities, but the cities themselves, we chose DC. We always use DC as an example because we're located here. So, but they were not involved in the, we just had to use some cities as examples. So just to be very clear about that, Washington, D.C. and Cincinnati were, Cleveland, were not actually involved in the development of those case studies. They really are provided as illustrative examples. We had a couple questions about the low mod data that's in the mapping tool. We get this question a lot. About whether the tool will contain an option to identify areas that qualify for low mod designation, and I'm assuming this is for area of benefit eligibility, and also a question about how often the low mod income areas will be updated. This tool is not intended to be a way of calculating eligibility for low mod area of benefit, and the Office of Block Grant Assistance will be putting out some guidance about using the ACS data for the purpose of calculating area of low mod benefit, and when that guidance is out, you should follow that, and until then, you should use the data and the guidance that you're already using. And we will be updating the information on the low mod area on census tracts that are in CPD Maps when we, probably annually.
I have a question about whether or not there's a way to upload your own data to, I think the question is really about CPD Maps to show how you leverage other funding sources and just show other types of needs on the map. Right now, there's not a way to bring outside data into CPD Maps. We hope in the future that we can create that function for you. But what we do have available is some of the data, all the HUD data from CPD Maps, which is all of the housing investments or other grant investment points and thematic layers are available as public map services. So if you are savvy with GIS desktop software or online software, then you can pull in those map services, and you can see the HUD data on your own mapping software or on an online free mapping software. And that way you would be able to show both types of data on the same map. And those mapping services are available on the ConPlan website. There's a link to them on the data sources subpage of the ConPlan website.
And just as a follow-up, we did have a similar question about whether it's easy to add bus routes to the map, and that applies to that as well. We are restricted right now to the data that's on CPD Maps. There's no way to bring in outside data. We were hoping to build that in a future enhancement to the tool.
I have a question about what the citizen participation requirements are for a standalone annual action plan, which would be submitted on November 15th. The citizen participation requirements have not been changed from the Consolidated Plan regulations, so whether you're doing an action plan as a paper document or the action plan in IDIS, they're exactly the same. You would just be downloading a Word version of your action plan from IDIS in order to post it for public comment and fulfill those requirements according to the regulations, and of course according to your own citizen participation plan that you've developed in accordance with the regulations.
We had another question about the vacancy data that's on the map, a question about whether we're using Postal Service vacancy rate. We're actually using vacancy rates from census. So we're getting them from the American Community Survey, the same as most of the data that we have on CPD Maps. It's not the Postal Service data.
I have a question about obtaining access for consultants or people that will be working on the Consolidated Plan, and I think this probably applies to obtaining access to IDIS, to the template in IDIS. And if you visit the Consolidated Plan website and go to the Consolidated Plan and IDIS page, there's a link for requesting access. It's also described in the May 16th webinar, which is available either on the OneCPD website, or you can get to it from the Training and TA section of the ConPlan website. And that goes through the steps on how to obtain access, how to request an ID, basically, for either your own staff or your consultants. And grantees do need to request access on behalf of a consultant, if the consultant will be working for them to prepare the consolidated plan. Checking to see if there's anything else that's different. Okay, I think that probably covers basically all of the questions that we received today. Again, you can feel free to email these two help desk email addresses on this screen, and these slides will all be posted, as John mentioned, shortly on the OneCPD page, which again you can access by Googling Consolidated Plan and going to the Training and TA page. It will direct you right to the OneCPD page. After I've finished speaking, a survey will pop up for you to complete. Please do complete the survey because we're working on some other toolkits and we have some questions that will help us in finishing both this toolkit and in developing other guidance materials for you. I know that for any of you that have used the previous webinars, surveys have generally been similar, but this one is actually more directed towards trying to figure out what kind of resources you need. But thank you for participating today, and that will conclude our presentation.
Great. Thanks very much, Caitlin and Meg. And thanks, everyone, for taking the time to attend today's webinar. Again, as Caitlin and Meg said, please complete the post-webinar survey if you can so we can get your thoughts for future webinars. The survey will appear in your internet browser immediately after this webinar has ended, or you can click on the survey link at the bottom of your screen. Also, as mentioned, the recording of this presentation will be available on the Consolidated Plan website on the TA and Training page. Please join us for the next webinar, which will take place Wednesday, August 8th. That's next week, for the next webinar in this series titled Data-Driven Planning for the Consolidated Plan. Once again, on behalf of the Office of Community Planning and Development, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.